Today, I want to talk about strategy. And strategy, when it comes to making online ads, is essentially an infinitely long subject that we could talk about forever. So, I want to try and really boil this down and give you the most important tools and the important kind of thought processes behind making an effective campaign. So, there's two things that I really want to consider before we dive into some examples. The first thing is whatever you do, whatever you create or whatever you sell, chances are that people aren't lining up to just give you money for no reason. Usually there's some kind of process of gaining trust from people, developing your brand to the point that they feel happy to trade with you. So I always think about things as if audiences sit somewhere on a sliding scale, kind of like a spectrum between cold and hot. If they have no idea that you even exist, then they're way on the cold. They're not even on the scale. And as you start to serve adverts that give them value and give them insight into what you do, there's this process of cultivating them. They become aware of you, and sometimes they even become familiar with your brand. And as we start to do this more and more, this familiarity and this kind of comfort with your brand and who you are starts to push them slowly on that scale into a warmer and warmer audience. Now, people rarely want to part with their money, but if you do manage to carefully cultivate a relationship with an audience to the point that they start to go warmer and warmer and warmer on that scale, eventually they might be ready to purchase with your business. So everything that I do when I think about building online campaigns, it's usually about considering that user and how would they go through that process from being ice cold into potentially a warm purchaser. This is definitely not an exact science, and it doesn't matter what online guru is trying to teach you how to run ads effectively. No one is ever going to be able to know exactly how that journey should pan out because it really depends on you. It depends on your product, and it depends on your knowledge of your customers, and it depends on those psychological factors that go into just making a good brand with good value and presenting it as best you can. So that's the one thing that's worth considering, the sort of sliding scale of cultivating an audience. And then the second thing that I'm always thinking in the back of my mind is, how do we at some point gain direct contact information for those people? Now, you might remember that this is typically done through lead forms, but whether we're getting email addresses or phone numbers or any form of direct contact, every time we do that, that means that we don't have to keep redeploying ad budget. We don't have to keep spending money in order to reach these users. So if I was to try and give my two best bits of advice is thinking about the sliding scale of cultivating audiences and then thinking about getting direct contact information. So moving on now, I want to give you three considered examples. And these are examples of businesses that run quite a wide gamut between the brick and mortar store right through to people who are selling products online, because it doesn't really matter what you're doing or what you're selling. This lesson is all about trying to give you that inspiration of how to actually think about marketing just slightly outside of the box. So first up, I want you to consider a coffee shop. Now, bear in mind, this could be anything that's really selling things in a location, but I just want to use a coffee shop as it's a pretty typical example. Now, you now know how to go into Ads Manager and you know how to build, say, a reach campaign, and you know how to locate that around the area of your coffee shop. And there you go. If you have some posters or if you have a video that showcases your coffee shop well, you have the tools now to build a campaign and start hitting people in your area through their devices, through their Instagram feeds and through their Facebook feeds and so on, even through the apps that they're using nearby. So what happens when we really drill down on our strategy and try and take that targeting and effectiveness one step forward? So here's an idea. Why don't you look around the coffee shop and start to gain a little bit of insights from the people who are already purchasing? Now, just to come up with some examples, let's say that some people are on their laptops. Let's say some people are reading books. You've got a typical age demographic. It doesn't really matter, but I'm sure you can learn things from people who are already buying things in your coffee shop. So if we just have a quick look at our ads manager right now, we might want to start thinking, okay, well, maybe a lot of people who like to sit and read come to coffee shops. So what sort of person is the person who likes to read? Well, maybe that's people who like the Amazon Kindle series. So if we populated an ad set of people who we know have shown an interest to Amazon Kindles, there's a good chance that maybe, and I say maybe for an important reason, maybe that would start to generate the right kind of reach for the right kind of clientele. Whenever it comes to anything that we're about to do, just like I've said before, the most important thing to do is actually test. It doesn't matter kind of how logical our thought process is with marketing. You just can't beat testing it to actually see what's working. But that's a great idea for an ad set. We could think about choosing people who use Amazon Kindles because they're likely to be readers. And maybe we could find other detailed targets here, like people who like books. That's a great starting point. A different idea would be the people on their laptops. Let's say that there's a lot of people who might be self-employed in your local area. Putting a little location tag around your area and targeting people who are self-employed, it's probably not a bad shout. People like to take meetings in a place that they feel comfortable. People might like to spend a couple of hours working in a coffee shop. So maybe we want to go to detailed targeting and we want to choose something like self-employed. And there we go. We might want to populate people who are in our area who are self-employed. Now, obviously, you can really go down the rabbit hole when it comes to detailed targeting, and anything you can think of, you're probably going to be able to find it in here. But if you can't find that exact thing, just go that extra step forward. For example, if they are a Mac user, maybe you can go into devices and find people who use a particular device. There's no reason why you couldn't make an ad set that, for example, only places your advert in, say, Instagram feeds, because that they're much more likely to be using a mobile device. You know what I mean? It's all about trying to figure out what different tests can we do to see if we're going to reach the right audience, and then see what the effect is as we go down the line. I want to show you a couple of tips and tricks when it comes to getting the location right too. You remember this little bar here where we can choose, for example, a particular city, such as London. And it will draw a circle around this location. And I think it's default to 40 kilometers, but it will go down to 17 kilometers, and it will go all the way up to 80 kilometers. Now, there's something that isn't necessarily so obvious when it comes to marketing in this platform. But if you do put a postcode in here, let's say, for example, I just use a random postcode just for the sake of argument. It will allow you to actually market in that exact postcode, that exact region. That's a good little hint. But even further than that, let me see if I can show you, because I just went on Google and I Googled the address just off a post office to explain that if you do put an exact address in, Facebook will actually allow you to bring that radius right down to 1 kilometer. Which means that if you do have a coffee shop somewhere, and especially if you're in a big city, or if you have a restaurant or somewhere in a really, really busy location, you can drill that radius right down to 1 kilometer. Now, it's not necessarily obvious how to do that because it doesn't show that as a default option in the business manager. But if you do put an address in there, it will allow you to bring that radius right down. Using the postcode areas, this stuff just really, really kind of elevates your targeting to be that little bit more precise. And at the end of the day, that means that you're spending less money to reach more of the right people. So another little tip and trick here when it comes to locations is you might want to test between whether you want to hit people who are living or recently in this location, people who are definitely living in this location, people recently here, or people traveling in this location. So there's some examples why this is important. Let's say that you are in New York City or London or Sydney, or you do have a place where there's quite a high footfall. Maybe you want to try and target the demographic of people who actually live there, as opposed to the countless delivery people, cab drivers, people walking to and from meetings. Maybe you do want to make sure that you're not just hitting the people who are transversing through that area, that you're actually hitting the people who are your locals. Playing devil's advocate, you might think completely the opposite. Maybe you're thinking, you know what, we're a cocktail bar. We want to be just getting as many people through the door as possible, especially people who are just swinging by. There's no reason why you can't play around and test with these things, because this is another little thing that isn't so obvious when you're building ad sets. Once you set your location, you can actually go further and say what kind of person in that location, or do you want someone who's just recently been seen in that location? The thing about device IDs and the networks for Google Maps and stuff like this is people's locations are measured really, really carefully. And this is really a great way to just elevate your targeting that next little bit. So I hope this is starting to set the tone for how we want to be thinking about targeting. There's lots of creative ways when it comes to trying to think about targeting the right person. what devices they use, what age are they, do you think they're the sort of people that would have a dog, what TV shows do you think they watch. Every little thing that you can learn and understand about your current clientele or the clientele that you're targeting is going to help you out. So one thing that might seem a little bit weird, but I promise you it can be quite useful, is to create something called a buyer persona. And you could sit there and think about an imaginary person who fits all of the ideal criteria to be a client of yours. And you can list all the things that this person might like, might connect with, might purchase. And using this buyer persona and really thinking about that person is going to help you when it comes to this stuff, when it comes to thinking of all of the out of the box ways that you could target the right person who's going to come and interact with your business. So I hope that helps. There's one more tip and trick that I want to show you when it comes to this kind of business, and that is the schedule. When it comes to building your campaign, you can choose between having campaign budget optimization on or off. And we remember that from the lessons before, that if you have campaign budget optimization on, it's going to segregate the budget relatively between different ad sets depending on the objective that you've set. For example, if it's reach and you've got a very big audience in your first ad set and a small audience in your second ad set, it's going to respectively put more budget into the bigger ad set than into the smaller ad set. Similarly, if you have something like a conversion campaign, the one that's selling the most stuff is going to get the most budget. So I hope that makes sense. Now, if we have budget optimization off, that means that we're going to have to start setting the budgets in different ad sets individually. Now, there's a cool thing that happens when we do this. So I'm just going to go and make a test reach campaign here. I'm going to turn campaign budget optimization off. And I want to draw your attention to what happens when we put our budget on a lifetime spend as opposed to a daily budget. You have an option called ad scheduling that shows down here. Now, just to quickly go over this, the frequency cap, if you remember, is saying how many times do you want to show an ad to someone in what period of time. So if I have a frequency cap of 1 impression every 7 days, that means that my advert can't hit someone more than once in a week because it's capped. Now, moving down to this ad scheduling section, if I click run ads on a schedule, I can actually now program exactly what times these ads are allowed and not allowed to serve. Now, this becomes really, really cool when we look at businesses such as our restaurants or our coffee shops. So let me show you why. Using this little toggle down here, we can say that I would like my advert to show between 6 and 9 a.m. every single day, and maybe also in the evening between, 4 and 8 p.m. Now, you might decide as a business that this makes sense because you want to have people coming in for their morning coffee, and maybe you want someone to be coming in for an evening book club. I don't know. It all depends on you and your business and how you're running things. But this can really be helpful if you're in a situation where you say, you know what, business is actually going okay on a Monday and a Tuesday, but it's really struggling on a Wednesday. So that might mean that on a Wednesday, between your hours that people are knocking around ready for a coffee, you might choose specific blocks of time, or maybe on a Tuesday evening when people might be thinking about where they need their meeting to be tomorrow. You can start to really, really drill down on exactly what periods of the time and week that you want to be hitting people with your ads. This means that you can really avoid spending money when you know that business is going well, and you can start to really get that budget out where you know you need help driving some sales. So that's another little tip and trick that isn't necessarily obvious in the Business Manager, but this sets the tone for a couple of tools and tricks that you can start to use for your business. And you can start to now think of creative ways of how you would use this in order to benefit your brand, in order to benefit your business, and fundamentally drive sales really where they matter. Moving on now to a second idea for a business. A common one is people who sell things online. I want to use the example of a personal trainer who is doing training videos and also selling courses online. You know, in a way that's kind of similar to what I'm doing, because I've obviously been selling my course online for you to come across it. Now, you remember in that process, whether we look at what's happening with my business or whether we look at our example of a personal trainer, this really comes back to that thing about cultivating an audience and building trust and building a rapport with people. You know, whenever it comes to selling things online, you know, marketing 101 is always about providing as much upfront value as possible. This is really, really important. If I'm a personal trainer and I want you to come and buy my training course, it's not really going to make sense unless you understand a bit more about me, what I'm doing, maybe the approach that I'm taking, maybe the fact that I have some educational background, maybe I have some nutritional experience. If you don't know that stuff about me, it's very unlikely that you're going to buy a course from me. Similarly, when it comes to this stuff, at some point along the line, you might have been reading articles, learning about what I'm doing with Transparent Digital Services, and at some point decided that I knew enough that you might be able to benefit from it. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make sure that I'm giving free lessons and free advice. I'm giving free articles to give you as much value as possible. At some point down the line, if you decide that you want to spend some money to get a more advanced course, then that's your decision, and that's how it needs to be with these dynamics. Looking at the idea of the personal trainer, or really anyone selling a course for that matter, I would say that we've really got to consider our spectrum of cold to warm. And the only real way of cultivating people is by giving them value first for free. So let's have a think about how we could do that. So if you're a personal trainer, it might be an idea to put some workout videos together. Maybe you do some HIIT sessions, or maybe you do a video on the top 5 exercises for a flat stomach. And in making these great bits of video content, you might want to start running video views campaigns to people who you think would be most likely to connect with it and most likely to consume it. So we go again into that thinking outside the box as a marketer and going, okay, well, if we've got a bit of video content that we want to give people for free, which is really valuable, let's have a think about our targeting. Maybe we want to target people in a particular age demographic. Maybe location's not so important because it's an online course, but maybe you do want to find areas that are quite affluent because you want to make sure that people are in a position to afford buying an online course. Maybe you want to think about hitting people who like the Weight Watchers, or the Biggest Loser TV shows, or anything to do with weight loss, the Beachbody pages. You want to just really dive in and do the same thing we did with the coffee shop. We want to think, who's our target demographic? Who's most likely to get involved with this? And how do we use the detailed targeting in Facebook to reach them? Now, on that note, I want to show you something. If you're in your ads manager, up here in our top navigation tab, there's this little menu hidden away called Audience Insights. Now, this is a great way to start playing around with different forms of targeting when it comes to literally any business that you have. Now, let me show you a couple of things here. Let's say that we're looking at the United States. Straight away, this is telling me that there's between 150 to 200 million people here. It's telling me the percentage of women who are on Facebook against the percentage of men who are on Facebook. And it's starting to give me all of these really interesting demographics about how many are single, or how many are married, how many people went to high school. Right now, even with the US, it's going to give you breakdowns on earnings, which means that you can actually target people who earn a certain amount of money, which is pretty invasive targeting. I get that. But if it helps you and it helps you get your message to the right people, it's good that you know that these tools are available. It shows you the kind of jobs that are spread out across this particular audience. Now, it doesn't matter how you filter this audience, it's going to start giving us some really, really key insights on how we can market to the right person. Let me show you an example. If I go down to the interests tab, and let's say, I don't know whether this would show up, but yeah, okay, look at that. So The Biggest Loser as a TV show has shown up as one of the interests that we can look at. Now, when we populate this, it's going to start to show us who is connecting with this concept that we've just got. We've got 72% of women against 28% of men are connecting with this show, but this is also giving us the age range breakdown. As well as that, if we just go to page likes, this is going to start giving us more information about what Facebook pages does this demographic of people connect with, which is another step forward to understanding this audience even better. So, for example, there's a fitness trainer here called Jillian Michaels. There's Hungry Girl, Paula Dean under Food and Drink. There's something called WW, formerly Weight Watchers, as the weight loss center. Now, all of these things are interests that we can populate in our ads manager. So we're getting really, really valuable insights now as to other sources of the right targeting when it comes to putting our message in front of them. So the audience insights is a really, really powerful tool because you can spend all day on this thing. You can start looking at the locations, where these people are mostly from. This is going to start helping you put your geolocation radiuses in the right place. It's just a really, really useful place to get inspired to all of the suggested interests that someone might be involved with. So you can start to refine people by age and gender, their interests, maybe if they're connected to other pages. So the audience insights is a really, really, really powerful tool. Now, second to that, once you do start to find all of these different interests that you start to populate in the ads manager, let's say, for example, we do look at our biggest loser example. One thing to pay attention to is this area called suggestions, because once you have done some detailed targeting, whether you look at our coffee shop example where we found the people who use an Amazon Kindle or those self-employed or people who like the biggest loser, clicking this suggestions tab is going to bring lots of other examples related to that set of interests that you might not have thought of. For example, there's pages about health and wellness, corsets, plus size clothing, diet food, slimming world, cholesterol. This goes on and on and on and on. And like I said at the start of this video, this is an infinite topic. You can go down the rabbit hole forever. So do try to do your best to consolidate some of your key ideas, split them into ad sets that you think are worth testing, and then start testing to see which ones are effective. Now that we're really starting to get a good grip of how we look at targeting, we do want to go back to this idea of putting the people on the spectrum of cold to warm. Now, we might be hitting the right person with the right videos and maybe they're consuming them. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to buy from us. Let's look at the person who has made some fitness videos, put them out there to the world, has targeted them quite well. What do we do next? Because we can't just show people videos and expect them to buy our online course. Now, this all comes down to putting multiple objectives in a chain of events. So let's say that our personal trainer has a website and there's a landing page on the website that showcases this course and what it's all about. Maybe there's even a page that gives some free lessons first, but the idea is at some point we're going to want to take people away from Facebook and we're going to want to show them the personal trainer's website. Here's one way that we could think about that. It's possible to segregate an audience that have engaged a lot with the video against an audience that haven't engaged a lot with the video. Now, I'm going to show you exactly how this is done in a lesson about audiences, but the important thing to remember is if we're serving video views, we can actually take all the people who may have watched, at least half of it as a great example. Now, if we can do that, that means that we now have this kind of barometer, this measuring stick of which people in the audience connected with this video and which ones didn't. So following this train of thought, if we took all the people that we know had watched this workout video, that we now know are associated with your brand somehow, and they know who you are because they just watched 3.5 minutes of the top 5 exercises to get a flat stomach, there's no reason why we couldn't take that audience and then build a second campaign, which might be, say, for traffic, and say, okay, hey, we've done all the targeting in the video views area. Now we've found this group of people who actually connected with this video. I now want to run a traffic campaign that is going to be driving these people over to the website when I'm selling the course, because now what we're starting to talk about is very different from running an advert to anyone and saying, come and buy my course. Now we're giving free value. We are educating them about us and our brand. They're actually doing the exercise routines and hopefully enjoying it. And these are the people that we're likely to actually generate sales from. So running a traffic campaign to get those people to your website means that they're actually going there, they're seeing how you're showcasing your brand, and then they're starting to make a decision. Maybe they want to watch even more free videos. Maybe they want to sign up to your mailing list in exchange for 20% off the course. We can do a lot of things, but the whole idea is now we're starting to consider this process of putting multiple campaigns in a sequence that are going to start to kind of funnel people from a very wide audience who don't know that you even exist into a smaller audience of people that have actually engaged with your content, into a smaller audience that have actually gone to your website or signed up to your mailing list. And eventually we're actually going to make some conversions. We're going to make some purchases. And if we can measure how people move through that journey, that's really where we're starting to get our strategy on point. The third example I want to give is actually a client that I've worked with long term. And I actually spoke to her and said, do you mind if I start to talk to my audience about your campaigns? Because they've been particularly successful. We're talking about a brand in LA called Art Angels. And they exhibit some of the coolest artworks from around the world. Now, this isn't something that you would typically associate with digital marketing because they're an art gallery. You know, they bring people in, they exhibit cool bits of art, and then some people buy them. Now, these are really high ticket items. This isn't like spending $4 on a coffee. Some of these artworks are really, really, really valuable. And I was given the task to come in and start to try and understand how some of these techniques could even apply to a brand like this. So this is where this concept of funneling really, really becomes important. You know, we're not talking about a small conversion here. We're talking about trying to convert someone to put their hand in their pocket maybe for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds, buying high-end art. So how do we target people like this? And even if we target the right people, how do we try and convert sales like that? At this point, I'm hoping that you can start to put yourself in the right frame of mind when it comes to targeting the right kind of person. For example, we've already been through how on Facebook Business Manager, we can actually target people who earn a certain income. So it might make sense that if you were representing a brand that were doing high-end sales, that you might want to try and isolate those users with a high net income. Or maybe you would want to think a step further and put location tags around postcodes or areas that you knew were very affluent. There's also ways of working around this. So let's say, for example, in a lot of European countries, this kind of targeting isn't allowed. You know, you can't go and start targeting people based on their income. So maybe you would want to target people who have a connection with high-end brands online. You know, going into the audience insights, seeing whether there are people who are interested in high-end brands like Gucci or Armani, and starting to understand what these people look like, where are they based. This is a way that you can start to just step outside the box and think about targeting in a really different way. You know, you can obviously do the straightforward ones like targeting people who like art galleries, targeting people who like specific art, you know, looking at people who like Banksy, for example. There's tons and tons of ways that you can go from the really straightforward to the really quite abstract when it comes to trying to find your target demographic. Now, I sound like a broken record, but all the way through this campaign, testing was imperative. It was really important. It didn't matter what new targeting ideas we'd come up with. We always tested to see which ones were working. And I'm going to show you how we tested that in later videos. But the idea is once we get a target that we believe is working and that people are engaging with video content or even with image posts, we then need to figure out, well, how do we funnel them and how do we give these people value? One of the ideas we came up with when it came to Art Angels was to bring a digital exhibition of the best artworks that they had. Now, bear in mind, some of these artworks were really quite prestigious and some of them were even one-off pieces. So the idea was, for any art lovers out there, we were going to do a lead form campaign that was hitting users that we knew had interacted with the brand previously through other campaigns. So imagine this. There was an audience that we set of people that we knew had engaged with previous posts. We knew they'd watched videos about Art Angels and we knew they'd interacted with pictures on Instagram about her artworks. Now what we did was we sent a lead form which basically said to people that we were doing an exclusive digital exhibition of some of the best artworks from around the world, that we would be sending them an email once a week with some of these exclusive works, and if they wanted to get involved, they could sign up right now. Now, this was really, really effective because we started to get a ton of people who were signing up and providing their information, giving Art Angels this database of users who were interested in seeing some of these exhibitions. Now, we even went a step further and asked them a question in the lead form to say what kind of art did they have an interest in? And then we segregated out these little playlists of emails that would hit those users with works exactly based on the kind of art that they wanted to see, i.e. we really went above and beyond to give the most amount of value we possibly could. So not only were we exposing the brand to a lot of people, but we were collecting direct information, giving them amazing value about amazing products that they wanted to see, and building long-term subscribers with their contact information that Art Angels could keep and market to forever. Now, this was a really effective way of thinking very long-term of what we were going to do with an audience. This wasn't just a quick grab, throw an advert in front of people. We really considered that funnel in every stage of that journey. This is really what I want you to take away from this lesson about strategy. You need to think, how are you cultivating the audience? How are you targeting them with the right content? And then once you are targeting them with the right content, How are you getting their direct contact information to deliver that value to them, but also so you can market to them long term, building your business in a way that isn't about short-term results, it's about long-term growth and long-term measurement. So rounding up this video, the next things we want to start considering when it comes to executing this strategy effectively is how do we build these audiences? Whether we look at the personal trainer example or what I just said about Art Angels, how do we find out if someone's watched 50% of a video? And how do we actually make that audience so we can target them with a different campaign? We're going to talk about that next in audiences. So I hope this has all made sense, and I hope that this has started to inspire you about how you can build the strategy that's right for your business. What I want to do here is just give you the tools and the right ways of thinking about this stuff, because there's no right or wrongs, and the only way that you're going to do this effectively is by testing. So go and jump into audience insights, start learning about your demographics, and I will see you in the next lesson.